The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Hamilton struck her gavel, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Order in the court," she commanded, her tone sharp with urgency. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery was occupied, reporters scribbling furiously. And the accused, Daniel Morgan, sat motionless, his jaw clenched and his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. The trial had gripped the public for weeks, with headlines painting Daniel as the mastermind behind $1 million charity fraud. To many, his guilt seemed all but certain. Just as the courtroom settled into silence, an unexpected voice pierced the air like a lightning strike. "Your Honor, I need to speak." The words hung in the air, trembling yet resolute. All eyes turned to Sarah Collins, who stood rigidly, her palm slightly damp but her determination unwavering. All heads turned as Sarah Collins, a quiet woman seated in the back row, abruptly stood. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was clear. A wave of whispers rippled through the room, faces etched with shock and curiosity. This wasn't part of the plan, and Sarah knew it. She wasn't a lawyer, wasn't even directly involved in the trial. But she couldn't remain silent any longer. "Sit down," barked a bailiff, striding toward her. But Sarah didn't waver. She raised her hand slightly, signaling him to stop. Her eyes locked on Judge Hamilton. The judge's stern gaze bore into her, a silent challenge to justify this interruption. The stakes in Daniel Morgan's case couldn't have been higher. Accused of embezzling from Morgan Hope Foundation, a renowned charity, his reputation was in shambles. Yet, as the trial progressed, Sarah had begun to notice cracks in the seemingly ironclad evidence against him. One discrepancy had been gnawing at her, a detail everyone else seemed to have overlooked. And now, as the pieces fell into place, she realized the truth couldn't wait any longer. This is where the story begins: an ordinary woman standing up against overwhelming odds in a courtroom brimming with tension. What Sarah revealed that day didn't just change the direction of the trial, it unraveled a conspiracy far bigger than anyone had imagined. This video will dive deep into the events of that fateful day, tracing Sarah's journey, the secrets she uncovered, and the powerful forces she dared to challenge. It's a story of courage, determination, and the relentless pursuit of justice. But beware, what lies beneath the surface might shock you. Daniel Morgan had always been known as a philanthropist, the kind of man who built his reputation on helping others. He was the face of Morgan Hope Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting underprivileged children. But all of that came crashing down when he was accused of stealing nearly $1 million from the foundation's funds. The news exploded like wildfire. Headlines blared his name, and pundits dissected his life on every major network. Philanthropist or fraud? One anchor questioned. Public opinion quickly turned against him. To many, the evidence seemed clear-cut: financial discrepancies in the charity's accounts and email trails allegedly linking Daniel to unauthorized transfers. His face, once associated with goodwill, became the symbol of betrayal. As the trial began, the prosecution painted a damning picture. They presented bank statements, email correspondences, and witness testimonies that appeared to build an unassailable case against Daniel. Every detail seemed to confirm the story. Daniel Morgan, a trusted public figure, had used his position to enrich himself at the expense of the very people he claimed to help. The courtroom, packed with reporters and onlookers, seemed ready to pass judgment before the trial had even concluded. But not everyone in the room was convinced. Sitting quietly in the back row of the gallery was Sarah Collins. An accountant with no ties to the case other than her personal interest in justice. She had followed the story closely, poring over every piece of publicly available evidence. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as she meticulously reviewed the prosecution's documents, that she noticed something odd. A single email address caught her eye, a minor detail almost anyone else would have missed. The address seemed legitimate at first glance. But on closer inspection, Sarah spotted a subtle typo. It was just one letter off from the official domain of Morgan Hope Foundation. To the untrained eye, it looked perfectly normal. But to Sarah, it was a glaring red flag. Her mind raced. Could this be a forgery? And if so, what else in the case had been fabricated? The thought chilled her. If the evidence was fake, someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Daniel looked guilty. But who would do such a thing? And why? Sarah struggled with whether to come forward. She wasn't a lawyer. Nor was she connected to the case in any formal capacity. Who would believe her? An ordinary accountant. Over the seasoned attorneys and investigators involved? She spent sleepless nights debating her next move, torn between fear of ridicule and a nagging sense of duty. In the days leading up to the trial, Sarah couldn't shake the growing dread that an innocent man might be convicted if she stayed silent. The weight of the truth bore down on her, and she realized she couldn't sit idly by while the case unfolded. So, when the moment came, Sarah made her choice. As the courtroom murmured with tension and the judge's gavel echoed through the room, she stood. Her voice trembled as she called out, interrupting the proceedings. It was a moment of courage born out of necessity. And it would set off a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. What Sarah had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The forgery wasn't just a one-off mistake, it was part of a much larger conspiracy. One that would expose powerful players operating in the shadows. But in that moment, standing before a skeptical judge and a stunned audience, Sarah had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. All she knew was that she had to try, no matter the cost. This was more than a trial about stolen money. It was about uncovering the truth, protecting the innocent, and holding the guilty accountable. And Sarah Collins, an ordinary woman with extraordinary courage, was about to change everything. The courtroom was heavy with tension as the trial of Daniel Morgan resumed. The prosecution's opening arguments had been forceful, presenting what seemed to be an airtight case against the accused. The judge sat at her bench, her stern expression a silent warning that order must prevail. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like whispers in the still air. The defendant, Daniel, sat quietly, his expression unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The lead prosecutor had just begun presenting an incriminating email thread when it happened. "I need to speak." The voice, trembling yet determined, cut through the air like a knife. All heads turned toward the back of the gallery, where Sarah Collins stood. Her hands clenched nervously at her sides, but her chin was raised in defiance. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Order in the court," Judge Hamilton snapped, her voice brimming with authority. "Who are you? And why are you interrupting these proceedings?" The bailiff moved toward Sarah, but she raised her hand. Her voice steadied despite the tremor in her knees. Your Honor. I have information that could change everything. Please. Hear me out. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras angled toward the commotion. The prosecutor frowned, clearly annoyed, while the defense attorney raised an intrigued eyebrow. Mississippi, this is highly irregular, Judge Hamilton said, her piercing gaze fixed on Sarah. But if you insist, approach the bench and state your case. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She was acutely aware of the dozens of eyes watching her every move. But she reminded herself why she was doing this, because the truth mattered more than her fear. Your Honor, she began, her voice shaking slightly. I've been following this case closely. While reviewing the publicly available evidence, I noticed a discrepancy in the email threads being used against Mr. Morgan. One of the email addresses is incorrect, just a single letter. But it suggests that these emails might have been fabricated. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor immediately objected, claiming that Sarah's claims were speculative and irrelevant. But before Judge Hamilton could respond, another voice interjected from the gallery. She's right, the man said as he stood, his appearance rumpled but authoritative. And I have the proof to back it up. The room fell into stunned silence as the man approached the front. He introduced himself confidently. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm a private investigator. And I've been looking into this case independently. What I've uncovered supports what this woman just said. Judge Hamilton's eyes narrowed. Mr. Hayes, you understand the gravity of interrupting this court without prior notice? I do, Your Honor, Robert replied, his tone respectful but firm. But what I have is critical to uncovering the truth. Judge Hamilton hesitated, then gestured for him to proceed. Robert opened his briefcase and produced a stack of documents. This is evidence I've collected over the past few weeks. It includes financial records, forged correspondence, and other materials that point to someone else framing Mr. Morgan. He handed the documents to the court clerk, who passed them to the judge. As Judge Hamilton reviewed the papers, the tension in the room was palpable. Sarah watched nervously, unsure whether she had done the right thing by speaking up. After a long moment, Judge Hamilton looked up, her expression unreadable. This is substantial, she said quietly. Mr. Hayes, explain your findings. Robert nodded and began pacing slowly, addressing the courtroom. The emails presented by the prosecution were doctored to implicate Mr. Morgan. My investigation uncovered discrepancies in the metadata, suggesting they were created using a fake account tied to Haven Enterprises. Haven Enterprises, as I've discovered, is connected to multiple shell companies used to funnel illicit funds. The courtroom broke into a buzz of whispers, only to be silenced again by the judge's gavel. Continue, Mr. Hayes, Judge Hamilton instructed. Robert's voice grew more confident as he laid out his case. What's more, financial transactions show that significant sums of money were transferred to an account controlled by a William Grant, a senior executive at Haven Enterprises. This points to a larger conspiracy, one designed to frame Mr. Morgan while the real culprits walked free. The gallery was in uproar. Reporters exchanged frantic notes, and the defense attorney looked as though he had just struck gold. Even Daniel, who had maintained his composure throughout the trial, appeared visibly shaken by this sudden turn of events. The prosecutor stood abruptly. His face flushed with frustration. "Your Honor. This is absurd. These are baseless accusations without proper vetting." "Mr. Caldwell." Judge Hamilton interrupted sharply. "This court will decide what is and isn't relevant. Sit down." The prosecutor reluctantly complied. His jaw clenched. The judge turned back to Robert. "Mr. Hayes. Do you have additional evidence to substantiate your claims?" Robert hesitated. Then nodded. "Not yet, Your Honor. But I'm requesting the court's permission to conduct a forensic audit of the financial records presented by the prosecution. With more time, I'm confident we can uncover the full extent of this conspiracy." Judge Hamilton studied him for a long moment. Then turned to Sarah. "And you, Miss Collins, your observations regarding the emails will be formally noted. You may be called to testify in the coming days." Sarah nodded. Her throat dry. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had walked into that courtroom as an outsider. But now, she was part of something much bigger. "Very well," Judge Hamilton said finally. "This court will adjourn until tomorrow morning to allow both the defense and the prosecution to review this new evidence. Court is dismissed." The gavel came down. And chaos erupted once more. As Sarah and Robert left the courthouse together, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and dread. The truth was finally beginning to emerge, but the fight was far from over. After the shocking courtroom interruption, Sarah Collins and Robert Hayes knew they had only scratched the surface of a much larger conspiracy. Determined to uncover the truth, they worked tirelessly, poring over the documents Robert had presented in court and tracking down leads late into the night. The emails were their first focus. Sarah's sharp eye had spotted the discrepancy, a single-letter typo in the sender's address, and Robert's expertise confirmed her suspicions. Using forensic software, they examined the metadata attached to the emails. The results were chilling. Timestamps and IP addresses pointed to a server in New York owned by a shadowy tech firm. Silverton Solutions. Silverton Solutions. Robert muttered, scrolling through his laptop. On paper, they're legitimate, a company that provides encrypted data storage for high-profile clients. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find they specialize in erasing digital trails. If someone wanted to frame Daniel Morgan, Silverton could do it. Their next breakthrough came from the financial records. Sarah, an accountant by trade, meticulously combed through the charity's ledgers late into the night, her heart pounding with each suspicious transaction she uncovered. The pattern was undeniable. Money was being siphoned from the Morgan Hope Foundation into shell companies, all of which led back to a single name, Haven Enterprises. A chill ran down her spine as the pieces began to align. Haven Enterprises, Sarah whispered, her fingers tracing the name on the screen. It keeps coming up. What do we know about them? Robert leaned back, his expression grim. They're more than just a corporation. They're a front, a network of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to hide illicit activities. Whoever's behind this isn't just after Daniel. They're protecting something much bigger. As their investigation progressed, the stakes grew higher. Late one night, as Sarah sat reviewing files in her small apartment, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the unknown number and hesitated before answering. "Miss Collins," a deep voice said. "You've been asking the wrong questions." Her blood ran cold. Who is this? Let's just say I know what you're digging into. Drop it. For your own safety. The line went dead before she could respond. Heart pounding. Sarah called Robert. His voice was calm but firm. This isn't a coincidence. They're trying to scare you. But it also means we're getting close. The next day, Sarah noticed a black SUV parked outside her building. Its tinted windows gave no clues as to who was inside. But it was there watching. She didn't tell Robert immediately, afraid of sounding paranoid. But as the days passed, the car followed her everywhere. Their investigation reached a boiling point when they finally tracked down Victor Nash, a former contractor for Haven Enterprises. Nash had a reputation as a fixer, someone who cleaned up messy situations for powerful clients. They arranged to confront him in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. When Nash arrived, he was as intimidating as his reputation suggested: tall, broad-shouldered, and with an air of quiet menace. Robert didn't flinch, meeting Nash's piercing gaze head-on. "What do you want?" Nash asked, his voice low and gravelly. "The truth," Robert replied. "We know Haven Enterprises is behind the forged emails and the financial discrepancies. We also know you've worked for them. Tell us who's pulling the strings." Nash laughed bitterly. "You think I'd just hand over that kind of information? You have no idea who you're messing with." Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "We're not backing down. Mr. Nash. Whoever you're protecting. They won't get away with this." For a moment, Nash said nothing. Then, he sighed. "You're chasing shadows. But if you want a name, try William Grant. He's the one who gives the orders. That's all I'll say." With Grant's name in hand, Sarah and Robert dove deeper. They hacked into Haven Enterprises' digital archives using a backdoor Robert had discovered. What they found was damning: hidden files detailing fraudulent accounts, forged documents, and a trail of money leading to Grant. But one file stood out: a confidential memo from Grant to an unknown recipient, instructing them to fabricate evidence against Daniel Morgan. "This proves it," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They framed Daniel to cover their tracks." But there was more. Emails within the files referenced someone called the benefactor. Unlike Grant, this person's identity was carefully hidden. But it was clear they were the mastermind behind the conspiracy. "The benefactor," Robert murmured. "Whoever they are, they're the real power behind Haven Enterprises. Grant's just a puppet." As they reviewed the files, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message: "Stop now, or you'll regret it." She showed it to Robert, her hands shaking. "They're watching us," she said. Robert's jaw tightened. "Let them. It means they're scared." Their investigation took a dangerous turn when Victor Nash was found dead in his hotel room. Officially, it was ruled a heart attack. But Robert wasn't convinced. "They're tying up loose ends," he said grimly. "We're next if we're not careful." But Sarah refused to back down. "If we don't expose this, no one will. We have everything we need to prove Daniel's innocence and to bring down Haven Enterprises." The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the defense prepared to present their findings. David Harper, Daniel Morgan's defense attorney stood confidently at the podium. Stacks of documents and a digital presentation prepared to unveil the truth. Daniel sat beside him, his face pale but hopeful. A stark contrast to the prosecution team, led by the combative and visibly tense prosecutor, Mr. Caldwell. "Your Honor," Harper began, his voice steady. "The defense has uncovered new evidence that casts significant doubt on the prosecution's case against Mr. Morgan. This evidence not only suggests my client's innocence but also exposes a network of fraudulent activities orchestrated by Haven Enterprises." The courtroom buzzed as Harper motioned to the clerk, who distributed binders of evidence to Judge Hamilton, the prosecution, and the jury. The first slide appeared on the courtroom's monitor, a timeline of transactions between Morgan Hope Foundation accounts and shell companies tied to Haven Enterprises. Harper continued, his voice unwavering, though the intensity in his eyes betrayed the weight of his words. "Our investigation revealed a series of forged emails and manipulated financial records. These documents were crafted with precision, designed to incriminate Mr. Morgan while shielding the real culprits, executives at Haven Enterprises, including one William Grant." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery, reporters frantically typing as the prosecution exchanged uneasy glances. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents with a critical eye. "This is a serious accusation. Mr. Harper, do you have corroborating evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harper replied. He clicked to the next slide, revealing a confidential memo from William Grant instructing subordinates to fabricate evidence against Daniel Morgan. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney paused for effect before delivering the final blow. "And these fraudulent actions were orchestrated under the direction of a shadowy figure referred to only as the benefactor. While we haven't yet identified this individual, their involvement is undeniable." Judge Hamilton's expression was unreadable as she carefully reviewed the evidence. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice firm. "Given the gravity of this evidence, I am ordering subpoenas for William Grant and other key personnel at Haven Enterprises. Furthermore, a forensic audit of the financial records presented by the prosecution will commence immediately." The prosecution's table erupted in whispered discussions. Caldwell stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The defense is basing their claims on incomplete and circumstantial evidence. These so-called findings are an attempt to distract from my client's guilt." Judge Hamilton silenced him with a sharp look. "Mr. Caldwell, this court will determine the merit of the defense's evidence. Until then, your objections are noted but overruled." The courtroom murmured again, the air thick with anticipation. The tide was clearly turning. But Harper and Sarah knew the fight was far from over. As the defense's presentation concluded, an unsettling development disrupted the proceedings. A bailiff entered the courtroom and whispered something to the judge, who frowned deeply before addressing the room. "This court has been informed of a sudden development, Victor Nash. A key individual implicated in the defense's findings has been found dead under suspicious circumstances. An official investigation is underway." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed to relay the news, and Daniel supporters exchanged concerned whispers. Sarah and Robert exchanged a glance, their worst fears confirmed. Caldwell seized the opportunity, his voice loud and accusatory. "Your Honor, the defense's primary source of corroboration is now conveniently deceased. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to derail justice." Harper responded swiftly. "Your Honor. The defense anticipated these tactics. Every piece of evidence submitted today has been independently verified and will hold up under scrutiny, regardless of Victor Nash's involvement." Judge Hamilton raised her gavel. "Enough. This trial is not a forum for speculation. We will reconvene after reviewing the forensic audit results. Court is adjourned until further notice." The gavel came down. But the drama was far from over. In the days following the courtroom presentation, Caldwell and his team worked furiously to discredit the defense's evidence. They held press conferences questioning the credibility of Sarah and Robert, painting them as amateurs dabbling in conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, Sarah and Robert worked tirelessly, preparing for the onslaught. They cross-referenced every document, ensuring no detail could be refuted. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more evidence tying Haven Enterprises to offshore accounts, shell companies, and questionable donations to political campaigns. The final blow came when Harper subpoenaed internal emails from Silverton Solutions, the tech firm tied to the forged emails. Among the recovered data was a damning email exchange between William Grant and the benefactor, confirming their orchestration of the scheme to frame Daniel Morgan. When the trial reconvened, the courtroom was electric with anticipation. The defense presented the new evidence, including the Silverton emails, leaving Caldwell visibly shaken. Harper's closing arguments were clear and concise. Daniel Morgan had been a scapegoat for a larger conspiracy. The judge ordered the immediate detention of William Grant and authorized further subpoenas for individuals tied to the benefactor, though the benefactor's identity remained a mystery. The defense's evidence had shattered the prosecution's case. For Daniel Morgan, the tide had turned. But for Sarah and Robert, the fight was far from over. They had uncovered the roots of a sprawling conspiracy, and they knew powerful forces would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The courtroom was silent as Judge Hamilton delivered her final verdict. Her voice carried the weight of the weeks-long trial, each word measured and deliberate. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds that the prosecution's case against Daniel Morgan was built on fraudulent grounds. The charges against Mr. Morgan are hereby dismissed. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a swell of relief from Daniel's supporters. Daniel, who had remained composed throughout the trial, finally let out a deep breath. His name was cleared, and the truth had triumphed. But the impact of the trial didn't end there. The defense's revelations about Haven Enterprises sent shockwaves through the media and the legal system. Investigative reporters uncovered a sprawling network of corruption, implicating powerful figures in politics and business. Public outrage mounted as more details emerged about the lengths to which Haven Enterprises had gone to protect their interests, including framing Daniel and silencing whistleblowers. The exposure of this conspiracy was more than a legal victory, it was a cultural moment. It reminded people of the importance of holding the powerful accountable and refusing to turn a blind eye to injustice. For Sarah Collins and Robert Hayes, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sitting together on a park bench overlooking the city, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I can't believe we did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We actually uncovered a conspiracy and cleared Daniel's name." Robert gave a small smile. "It wasn't easy. There were moments I thought we wouldn't make it. But you never gave up." Sarah. You saw something everyone else missed. And you refused to back down. Sarah shook her head. I couldn't have done it without you. You knew how to follow the breadcrumbs. Even when the trail was dangerous. Their conversation turned to the risks they had faced, the threatening phone calls. The car that followed Sarah. And the sudden, suspicious death of Victor Nash. I think about Nash sometimes. Sarah admitted. He was part of something terrible. But he still gave us a name. Without that, we might not have succeeded. Robert's expression darkened. The people behind this aren't done. The benefactor is still out there. They'll try to regroup. Cover their tracks. But at least now, the world knows what they're capable of. For Sarah, the experience was transformative. She had gone from being an anonymous accountant to a key figure in one of the most significant legal battles of the decade. The courage she found within herself surprised even her. And it was a reminder that ordinary people could make an extraordinary difference. The story of Daniel Morgan's trial wasn't just about uncovering a conspiracy, it was about the power of truth and the bravery it takes to stand up for it. Sarah and Robert's journey proved that even in the face of immense pressure and danger, doing the right thing was worth the risk. In a world where deception and corruption often go unchecked, their actions sent a powerful message: justice is worth fighting for. It takes courage to speak out, especially when you feel small or outmatched. But change begins with one voice, one step, and one decision to confront what's wrong. As Sarah looked out at the city skyline, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Do you think it's over? Sarah asked. Her voice quiet but filled with lingering uncertainty. Robert met her gaze, a glint of determination lighting up his eyes. No, he said firmly. It's just beginning. But this time, they know we're watching. And we're not backing down. Together, they had proven that the truth could prevail, no matter how deeply it was buried. And for those still watching from the shadows, they sent a clear message: the fight for justice wasn't over, not by a long shot.